Now, let's talk about this topic of some African tribes being descendants of the ancient Israelites. It's a topic that keeps coming up again and again and again, and even in the comment section of the videos that I've already published, this topic keeps coming up with some people saying, "Oh, this group is descendants of the ancient Israelites, or they are the true Israelites." And I guess it's a topic that is a bit controversial. There are people who actually believe that some African tribes are descendants of the ancient Israelites. There are tribes that are often mentioned. For example, the Lemba in the southern part of Africa. The Maasai have been mentioned at one time or another. The Kalenjin. I think some tribes in the western part of Africa have been mentioned. And then there are people who say the entire Bantu, for example, is it is descended from ancient Israelites. Of course, there are tribes there are African tribes that have actually been accepted by the mainstream, that they actually can say, even though it's a bit complicated to say they are descendants of ancient Israelites, because that alone is a bit stretching, and I'm going to explain before somebody jumps on me. I'm going to explain what I mean, because when it comes to the question of Israelites, there are two things that are often mixed up, and this is the question of ancestry, being descendants of the children of we can say Abraham or Jacob, and then there is the other question of the religion part, because there is the Judaism religion, and like any other religion, over time there are people who've converted to that religion. Now they are, of course, considered to be Jews, is the right word for that. But that does not directly translate to them being descendants of Abraham in the genetic terms. And sometimes people forget that Israelites had a religion, Judaism that is, and this religion still exists to today. And this religion, like we can say Christianity and Islam, people converted to it. And there are huge groups of people who at one time did convert to Judaism. And now those groups, of course, we see them as Israelites to some extent, or in the modern day, some of them have moved to Israel, the state, the nation state, we can call it the nation state. Now, let's come back to Africans having this belief, or some African tribes, or some people associating some tribes with being descendants of ancient Israel. I think it comes down to stories. Often when we are told very interesting stories as human beings, at one point we tend to want to become the characters in the story. And in fact, a good story is always one where the person who is reading it or listening to it imagines themselves to be a character in that story. Then that's the best story, because it connects. And from where I sit, and I want you to take this as my personal opinions, don't take it as some authoritative source. I am not an authoritative source. I have to put that. I have to make that very clear. I am not an authoritative source of any historical facts or whatever, or anything like that. From where I sit, it's about a story. And this is what I mean about the story. We Africans have been told a story, and we found the story to be so interesting. And it's not only us. This is a story that has been told everywhere, the most parts of the world, at least. And it's the story of the ancient Israelites. And it's a very compelling story. And we connect with the story because it's not just a story. It's a story that is combined with a belief system. And it's a belief system that most Africans have accepted as the true maybe belief system, or the way to go towards the higher being, God. Now, this story becomes special in that regard. And it's a story that I can say has been told more than more stories that can be told. Now, when you understand or get other stories from other parts of the world, then you get to understand that the ancient Israelites were not so unique. Some people might get offended by me saying that. They were just a nation state like most others that existed during that time. It's just that the story we hear from them is one that they themselves tell in their books, and we get to see it from the inside. Of course, every story told from the inside has biases, and I'm going to explain. The ancient Romans told stories about themselves. If you read Levy's book, The Founding of the City, it's a humongous text. You read it from the beginning to the end. It tells the story of the ancient Romans, and the Romans portray themselves as the most civilized, of course, the most organized in the world, the most, everything. They are the best, the most courageous at the battlefield, the most successful at war, and things like that. And when you read that story of, for example, the ancient Romans, and you compare it with the story of the ancient Israelites, I would say they are similar, not actually the same. That would be the wrong word to use. The two nations were expressing themselves in the best way possible in their texts, of course, with their own internal biases. Now, if the story of the ancient Romans was told linked up with religion, for example, and it was told to Africans, today there will be many African tribes who would be claiming that they are likely descendants of the ancient Romans. And there are many reasons why. Some people say, the culture and the practices of the ancient Israelites is similar to some culture, some practices of some tribe in Africa. When I was reading from the founding of the cities, some of the things that I found to be so interesting is some of the practices of the ancient Romans. And then there's another book I read, and I've mentioned this, is the Histories by Herodotus. And this is more, of course, it covers Persia, Egypt, and the rest of the world, but it also says a lot, or it explains a lot about the ancient Greek city-states. And some of the things that I found in these two texts in particular were practices that were in Europe that are so African. Okay, I'll put it in quotes, so African, because the fact that they are in Europe, then it says they are not African. But they are African because they came across as very African to me, because I identified them as things that African tribes do. The Europeans no longer do those things, but Africans still do those things. I'll give you an example. An example is the practice of when you go to battle, you kill an animal, and then you read the inner organs of the animals to understand what the gods are saying about that battle. Now, that's something that the Greeks and the Romans used to do, but that's something that African tribes have been doing, and some of them still do. I think I saw a documentary where some Sudanese tribe, I think it's in the southern Sudan, do that. They kill animals and then they read the intestines. And Kenyan tribes, I think the Kalenjin, if I'm not wrong, did that. They would kill animals, and then goats in particular, and then they will read the intestine to see signs. And these things that the Greeks and the Romans did. So if that story of the Romans or the Greeks was told as much, or to the extent that the story of the ancient Israelites has been told to Africans, there will be tribes in Africa that will be saying, we are related to maybe the ancient Greeks or the ancient Romans, but many people don't say that because that's a story that is not known in the mainstream African consciousness. But the story of the ancient Israelites is a very well-known story in most villages. The most rural part of Africa you can go, that story is well told. Now, if we, of course, I've said these stories is that the story of the ancient Israelites is so attractive to us because, number one, it is written down. and then number two, it was combined with the religion, and then it was brought to us in that package, and now it becomes so attractive to us, and it connects so deeply with us. And as I've said, in a very good story is one where the person listening to it imagines themselves to be in the among the characters in the story. Now, but if our own stories, Africans, were if our ancestors managed to write our stories down like the Romans did, here is another thing I need to mention. If you look at this claim of who is related to ancient Israelites, it's not so much in Europe, even though Europeans were Christians for a longer period of time than Africans, we can say. And I think, and again, personal opinion, I think that's because the Europeans already had their stories written down. And when they received Christianity, they accepted the religion, but they understood, they had their own stories already with them. The Romans, Italians, we can say, they accepted Christianity, but there is no way they were going to get lost and start thinking, oh, maybe we are related with the ancient Israelites, because for them they already had stories, very well documented stories about their origin, about who they were from thousands of years. They knew this, so they didn't get that as a problem. The British, we can say, they had their stories going back very many years, and so they didn't get lost there. For us, we got lost because our stories either have not been told very well, our stories from back, or we didn't have the opportunity to record them in documents. Maybe we did, but we lost the document, or the documents got lost. If the story of Aksum, the empire of Aksum, was very well told, and we had documents that tells us the story of the empire of Aksum, most of us would be so proud, maybe be like, maybe we come from the Aksum. If the story of Kush was well told, well documented, with documents available, most of us would likely be like, yeah, maybe we come from Kush. We are descendants of people who were in Kush. If the story of Makuria was told, we could likely be saying, and because Makuria is, for some people believe, has a lot of influence on how most African tribes live today, especially their economic activities, keeping animals and growing millet and sorghum and things like that. If the story of that empire was well documented, written down, and shared with us today and told widely, most of us would not even be imagining about the story of the ancient Israelites and trying to attach ourselves to that. We could not. We could be so proud of our own civilizations that did a lot of things. And the only problem is history is weird. If it wasn't recorded, it didn't happen. That's how history is for the most part, that if something happened and there is no record to show that it happened, it's like it never happened. It's like the thing that he say that if a tree falls in a forest and nobody heard it falling, then it's like it didn't make any noise. It's the same thing with history. If the story of Benin Empire was told in detail and written down in texts that are so detailed, most of us will be focused on that as where we come from and our identity. If the story of old Ghana was told, if the story of Mali was told, and Kanka Musa, the richest man who ever lived, if that story was told in a more detailed, in a text that is spread all over Africa, we will get attached to that story, and in our heads we will be trying to be characters in that story other than trying to be characters in the story of others. If the story of Great Zimbabwe was told, we will be imagining ourselves as characters in that empire and how big it became and what it achieved when it existed. We'll be thinking of ourselves as characters in that story. If the story of Shaka Zulu was told, Matabeleland, and the story of Bunyoro Kitara was told, we will be seeing ourselves as characters in those stories, and will not find time to be so obsessed about being characters in the story of people. And here, I'm not saying that there is no possibility that some people in Africa have relationships with people who lived in the Middle East maybe 2,000-3,000 years ago. But again, every human beings are related. Like every tribe is related to every tribe. All human beings are related, and there is no pure gene in the human race. There is none. No tribe can say theirs is a pure gene. Genes are always mixed up. During wars, conquering, taking people, they become part of your genes. During movements, trade, genes spread. So there is no tribe or race that can today claim that us, we are pure this. There's nothing like pure anything when it comes to humans. So yes, there's every tribe is supposedly related to the ancient Israelites, as ancient Israelites were related to every other human beings. So yeah, if our stories were told very well, and we have a few stories that could be told, that are well told, but could be told even better, that are about Africa. We can talk of ancient Egypt, for example. And it's today become very controversial to even claim that ancient Egyptians were black. It's like it's a question that has no answer. But I remember reading Herodotus' book, and this is somebody who lived 2,400 years ago, and he writes in his book, and the way he describes ancient Egyptians, they were black. They had woolly hair. That's how he describes them. There are two incidences in the book where he talks about, in one part, he talks about the Egyptian soldiers going to Europe, being taken there by King Sesostris, and they go to Europe and they stay there and they marry local women. Now he goes there later on and he finds this tribe who look dark skinned and they have woolly hair, and he wonders why are these people here, and he's told these were Egyptians who came. That explains this ancient Egyptian, or at least part of ancient Egyptians were black. And then he talks about two black doves. These are two women who left Egypt. One of them was taken to Carthage, and another one was taken to Greece, ancient Greece, some ancient Greece city-state. And it is this one woman who went to ancient Greece who founded the Oracle of Dodona, which was a big oracle in that part of the world where Greeks used to go to find out what the gods were saying. And the person who founded it was a black woman. And Herodotus says that they were called the black doves because they were black. And they were doves because when this woman, for example, reached Dodona, she could not speak the local language. So the Greeks would think like she's talking like a bird, like they could not hear what she was saying. But later on, the dove spoke. And it spoke because later on, the woman was able to speak the Greek language. So ancient Egyptians were black, at least up to some point, because Egypt has had so many different people come. The Europeans came, the Persians came. So many people have conquered Egypt, but go back, ancient Egyptians were black people with woolly hair. Now, those stories, if they are told very well, we will focus on being characters in those stories. Now, yeah, my answer is we are so obsessed, or some of us are so obsessed with being related with the ancient Israelites because the story that has been told to us so many times, it's been told so well to us, and it's a very good, compelling story, and we just want to be characters in that story. Those are my random thoughts.